Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. We got Goes from MMA Junkie Radio here in Las Vegas. Danny Segura down in South Florida. He's another killer. And then up in the Great White North, Mike Bond. He's in Toronto. Ken Hathaway back on the ones and twos. Great to have him back. Let's get started. Bo Nickal is booked for his UFC debut after going 2-0 in this past season of Dana White Contender Series. He's fighting Jamie Pickett at UFC 282 on December 10th. Is this about the type of debut you expected, even though he did call out Khamzat Chimaev? Or did you want the UFC to push him any higher? Or did we need to slow our roll? What is it, fellas? 4 minutes are on the clock. Goes, you're leading off.
This one's a tough one, man. When you have a hot commodity like this, you have to be smart about what you're doing, especially when you go with that early stance of making Bo Nickal do a second Dana White Contender Series fight. I think that in itself kind of told you what their strategy was going to be going forward with a guy like Bo Nickal. They told you everything you needed to know there. Clearly, Bo Nickal could face higher competition. He does it every day in the gym, and some of the best fighters in the world talk about how he's able to hang with them, but that doesn't mean you have to rush it, right? So for the first fight, I think it about makes sense. For the second one, should he get a victory here, I do think you will have to take a little bit better jumps, more decent matchups for him, because really what's going to be interesting is the back and forth with him in the UFC, because if he keeps calling out big names like this, guys, it's going to be harder and harder to justify why he's getting these smaller matchups, right? So if he keeps at it with the Khamzat stuff, eventually, if he keeps winning the way he's winning, destroying people are going to start to ask questions. So UFC has to be careful with him there. The only thing we can kind of look at is maybe like a guy like Sean O'Malley, what he's been through in his career to date. I mean, he's got a really big fight right now, but it took him, 9-10 fights to get there? So I don't know. With Bo Nickal, I feel like he's going to get to where he needs to be a little bit quicker than everyone else. But this fight right here so far makes sense.
And you also got the attention of fellow Smesh brother, Darren Till. So he's doing all right. How about you, Danny? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Goes. I think that Bo Nickal needs to kind of have a little bit of a slow roll into the UFC, because this is not Dana White Contender Series. This is not some regional circuit, right? Like, this is the cream of the crop. This is the very best that there is in mixed martial arts. And Bo Nickal is a stud. I think he's bound to be UFC champion, but just because he's that good, that doesn't mean he gets to skip a developing process. I do think, like mentioned, that his development process is going to be much, much shorter than others. I don't think we're going to see 4 or 5 years of developing. I don't think he needs to log in 10, 15 fights in order to finally get into his own. I think this is going to be fairly quick. So I just want to see him over the next year or so fight as many times as possible against people outside of the rankings, because remember, this is a guy that's accustomed of wrestling hundreds of matches a year. Wrestling is a pretty busy sport, so keep him busy, have him fight kind of like Khamzat did at the beginning, like every other month. Have him very, very busy over the next year outside of the rankings. Have him log in 3 more fights, 4 more fights, and then we can start thinking about the rankings. So again, I do think there's going to be a developing process, but it's got to be short, because it's Bo Nickal. Come on, I mean, he's already a killer.
All right, and Mike Bond, how would you handle all this?
I think this is an appropriate first step for the UFC debut. Obviously, Jamie Pickett, I think, has 21 pro MMA fights. He's fought in the UFC a number of times. I know the results haven't been that spectacular for him, but he's a good test for Bo. It's going to be on a pay-per-view card, perhaps the main card in a big arena. This is a good way to check off some boxes for Bo Nickal and see if I know he has fought in front of massive crowds, wrestled and done all that, but it's a different edge when you're kind of on that pressure, that type of platform for the UFC. So I think this is good to start. If he goes out there and just demolishes the guy in a minute, like we've seen in Contender Series fights, then I think we need to reevaluate. The Hamzats of the world, I don't want to see that quite yet. I want to see him get some more experience. I'm sure he wants to be on a better contract before he gets those type of fights. So to me, this is an appropriate way to start the career, and we'll see what the performance looks like, and then we go from there. But I'm suspecting big things from Bo Nickal. He's the talk of the town. We're leading off the show with him, so he is making an impact very, very quickly here.
Good stuff, guys. You guys nailed it all the way around. So we move on to topic number 2. So when Mackenzie Dern entered the UFC in 2018, there were high expectations given her decorated BJJ pedigree. While she's worked her way up into the strawweight top 5, her loss to Yan Xiaonan this past weekend was her second to a top contender in her last 3 fights. 4 years into her UFC tenure, do you still believe that Dern will meet expectations and win a UFC title? 4 minutes are on the clock. Danny Segura, it's on you, sir.
Anybody that's been watching this show or has been following me for some time knows that I'm the biggest Mackenzie Dern stan. Since she entered the sport, I felt like she was bound to be UFC champion. Just that jiu-jitsu pedigree is just absolutely ridiculous. And we've seen many jiu-jitsu people cross over to the MMA world, but they do not cross over their jiu-jitsu skills. You know, they can't really grapple as well as they used to in the sport jiu-jitsu. So Mackenzie Dern, I still feel like she's bound for big things. I do feel like that window is getting smaller and smaller because now we see a pattern. The type of losses that she's had in the sport come to fighters against fighters that are very similar in style. Zhang Xiaonan, Marina Rodriguez, and Hibas all have similar styles, very strong, very physical fighters that are not, any dummies on the ground, that know what they're doing. They're not experts, but they certainly know their basics very well, and they're very good strikers. And we're clearly seeing a pattern that Mackenzie Dern cannot get past those opponents with the current skill set that she has. However, I do think there's a simple fix to that. And I'm not here campaigning for her to leave her team. I think Jason Perillo is amazing. I think the people at Ruka are obviously doing a very great job over there. But how can you have that great jiu-jitsu base? And we see it. You take somebody down and the fight stays on the ground and basically the opponent is on survival mode. But how can you have that skill set and not complement it with great takedowns? We know her percentage for takedown accuracy. It's very, very, very low. So if our Mackenzie Dern's team, get her in the gym, because she's also one of the smaller strawweights at this point. Get her in the gym, get her lifting heavy, get her doing some squats, get her doing some deadlifts, and get her with some high-level wrestling coach. I don't know if it's Henry Cejudo or who does it have to be exactly, but her takedown accuracy needs to go up. I think it's nice to have the striking, but I think ultimately it comes down to that, having a good wrestling base. Because clearly, once the fight gets to the ground, Mackenzie Dern dominates to the point that we're seeing rounds that are, that are debatable to being 10-8 just out of pure grappling.
Mm-hmm. Mike Bond, how would you direct Mackenzie Dern going forward?
I think Danny nailed it pretty good there. Mackenzie Dern's UFC takedown accuracy at this point is 11%, and that's not going to cut it if you want to be a UFC champion. It's just not going to work out. So she needs to orientate her game around finding, I know you can go out there and just be like, hey, just pull guard if you can't get the takedowns. It's not that easy. You don't want to put yourself in those compromising positions. If you're Mackenzie Dern, you want to be on top. You want to be working your game that way. So I think she needs to orientate her training around, whether it's with her current team, elsewhere, as Danny mentioned, to try to get that, up a level and be able to get these fights on the ground more consistently. Because if she can take her opponents down like she did to Xiaonan in the second round, the fifth round, it's going to be game over if she can do that every round. So I don't know if just, as she's maybe gone on here in her mixed martial arts journey, she's focusing on the striking, she's focusing on other elements. Her jiu-jitsu is still way ahead, but maybe that gap is slowing a little bit where people are able to survive a little bit more. So I think it just maybe is a hard look in the mirror, figuring out where you need to tailor your training, and I think she'll be fine. Will she be UFC champion? I'm not going to sit here and guarantee anything, but I think she can at least get to the point where she is fighting for that belt.
All right, goes, wrap things up.
Well, she may not have reached her expectations of being a world champion, but she's definitely been a success for the UFC so far. Like the guy said, she's made improvements. For a while we were all saying she lacked a little bit in the striking. She was able to kind of get in there and work on that, and that has improved over time. So nobody can sit here and say she can't do the same with wrestling. However, there is a clock, and you have to get this done right now. The one thing she does have in her favor, though, is she has that one skill set that you can always say, what if she gets you down to the ground? And I think that maybe helps you jump a few ladies along the way to get to a title shot. So I think she's still in a good shot. I can't say for sure if she'll be champ, but I would lean that she has a good shot at it.
Yeah, and I enjoy watching her compete, man. So, all right, we'll see what happens, what kind of adjustments she can make going forward. Big losses, though, that she's taken. Topic 3, AJ McKee said he would welcome Nate Diaz to Bellator with a Long Beach slap. Does this fight and Nate Diaz signing with Bellator interest you? Coker, he's been saying some stuff. 4 minutes are on the clock. Mike, get the party started.
Not really, if we're being honest here. I mean, I don't think Bellator is the appropriate fit for Nate Diaz at this stage of his career. It just doesn't seem likely to me. Maybe they open up the wallet to such a point that he's like, hey, it would be stupid of me to not do this. But from the money I was hearing he was getting offered from the UFC down the stretch there, I can't imagine Bellator is being able to blow that out of the water where he has to take it. And even if he did go there, I don't think he's fighting at lightweight. I don't think he's fighting AJ McKee. So I know they had their little moment. I think the Jake Paul Woodley fight, there was some backstage tension, a little, viral moment there. But I don't think there's any real hate there. AJ McKee told me it's not like a serious personal issue. And, he gave me that quote about the Long Beach slaps. So it just doesn't seem like something that's going to align perfectly to me. Obviously, that would be tremendous if you're AJ McKee and for Bellator to get Nate Diaz in, to have him fight the guy who's basically, one of the faces of your organization, fought all 20 of his pro fights with Bellator. So it seems like, that would be a home run for them. But for Nate Diaz, I just can't see the logic in it. So we'll see what happens once his three-month exclusive negotiation period is up with the UFC and he's actually free to start speaking with people about where he could realistically go. I'm sure Bellator will make a play. I'm sure BKFC, everyone is going to make a play, but I can't sit here and look at Nate Diaz and think that anything is going to happen with him next other than him boxing Jake Paul. So we'll see what happens here, but that one I'm kind of crossing off the list.
All right. Fair enough. And how about you, Goes? Let's just say he doesn't enter the tournament. Mike brought up good points. That guy ain't going to make 155 3 or 4 times. What about just like some sort of a super fight against AJ McKee?
I'm interested in it because Scott Coker in the past has dealt with his brother, Nick Diaz. He knows how the Diaz brothers work. And I feel like if he signs with Bellator, that's not just it, guys. Like, he's not just going to fight MMA. I think Scott Coker's smart enough to kind of use him a little bit on the MMA side, but also give him those avenues to do other things with the relationship with Showtime, the opportunity to box. We've seen MVP, right? He went over, he did BKFC. They've done cross-promotion with Ryzen before. Scott Coker's a little bit more of an open book when it comes to that type of stuff. So I could see Nate Diaz signing something where he does do a little MMA here, but he also has the branch to go other places, right? He could still make money off of sponsorships. AJ McKee, if you can make it kind of like a super fight type deal, as George said, I think that does make things interesting. But it has been a minute since Nate Diaz has made 155. I don't doubt that he could do it. The guy is game for whatever as long as you pay him what he wants. But the problem here, one of the bigger problems that Scott Coker really has to evaluate is if you look at that last Nate Diaz fight. I don't know if it's MMA or if his eyes are on boxing, but he just didn't seem like he wanted to be there at times. It just wasn't the Nate Diaz that we're used to seeing. So he has to make sure that whatever he gets out of Nate Diaz, he's going to put 100% into it. And that's always the motivator is always money, guys. And I think if he gives them the opportunity to do other things, I think maybe you could do something here.
All right, Danny Segura, your thoughts?
Yeah, I see both sides of the coin in terms of this, both sides of the screen here. I agree with what Mike says, but I also agree with what Ghost is saying. I do think that Nate Diaz made it pretty clear leaving the UFC that he feels like the UFC is the place to be as far as mixed martial arts. We also know that the UFC have the deeper pockets, and at this point Nate Diaz is looking for that cash. So maybe in the future there's a possible return. Plus they still have Conor McGregor, which is easily his biggest fight in mixed martial arts, and obviously that trilogy will sell itself. But I also do see the points that Ghost is making. If you sign with Bellator, look, you got Showtime Boxing. We saw MVP go to bare knuckle boxing. Like, you have all these other avenues that open up. You can bring your sponsorships back. It seems Scott Coker's a lot more flexible than Dana White. So I see both points here. I do think that there is a little bit of substance in Bellator, that AJ McKee fight, maybe a fight with MVP. I do feel like there is some fights there. But ultimately, what I want to see, and I know I'm going over time, it's that Conor McGregor trilogy. There's unfinished business, 2 of the biggest fights in mixed martial arts history. Go do your boxing, whatever you need to do, Nate Diaz. But please, at some point, make that Conor McGregor trilogy happen.
Good stuff. And yes, Scott Coker may be more flexible, but Dana White's more jacked. Have you guys seen those pictures? Wow.
Mhm.
Put in some work. All right. Topic 4. Eddie Alvarez announced he's amicably parted ways with one championship. He said he has meetings lined up with almost every big player in MMA. What's the best option for him? 4 minutes are on the clock. Goes. We're coming back to you.
You know, at first, I thought it was PFL. I thought that would be a good landing spot for him. He's had plenty of time to rest his body, his mind. There's a history of guys that are similar like him, like, Anthony Pettis going over there. You can learn from those type of things, make an instant $1 million if you could be successful. But then I thought about it, and I thought once the talk of the Bellator Grand Prix came up, other options that are available to him there, I think Eddie himself said the beef isn't really with Bellator. It was with Bjorn Rebbe. It's not with Scott Coker or anything like that. So I think they can make that work. So if he could somehow get over to Bellator, get into that Grand Prix, and even outside of that, before you sign that contract, Eddie Alvarez, we've heard from you many times, you're a huge boxing fan. So why not put something in there that says, hey, if I have the opportunity, I'd like to also box under that Showtime banner. Jake Paul, if you look at Eddie Alvarez, that's a stake, right? That's exactly what he always guns for. A former champion, a guy that's got some decent striking. I could see something like that maybe coming to fruition later on. But I like that there's different avenues for Eddie Alvarez there. So I would say Bellator should be his home.
Dude, there must be like 10 options for Jake Paul to box now from all the stuff we mentioned on Spinning Back Clique. Next up is Danny.
Yeah, we're just talking about Nate Diaz. Look, that's another fight. If Bellator is able to sign Eddie Alvarez, I mean, that'd be a very enticing fight. I'd definitely watch it. But I agree with Ghost. I think ultimately the best option for Eddie Alvarez at this point is to return to Bellator. I am a huge fan of sort of the legend returning back to where it all started. I mean, it goes in George, you know it, in soccer, it happens all the time. And Niño Torres going back to Atletico to finish out his career. Buffon going back to Parma. Cristiano Ronaldo going back to Man U, although it hasn't really panned out for him in this season. But it's nice to have a legend go do their thing, grow up in a promotion, go do their thing outside of it, and then come back. I would love to see him close out his career in Bellator, have Bellator pay respect to his career, do it in a nice way, big fights, and just pay tribute to the legend that Eddie Alvarez is. So I'm all for that. Plus, there's a lot of interesting fights out there for him at 155 in the Bellator promotion. So I'm all for it. I'm all for Eddie Alvarez back in Bellator.
All right, Mike, what are your thoughts here for Eddie Alvarez?
I think he does have a lot of options. I guess right off the top, I probably would rule out a UFC return. I just don't think that's the best fit for him at this moment. But when you're talking about, either PFL or Bellator, they are offering similar things, right? Like if he signs with Bellator, he'll probably be in this lightweight Grand Prix. If he signs with PFL, he'll be in their lightweight season. Both $1 million prizes at the end. So maybe he just looks and say, who's going to give me the better base pay outside of the $1 million in the tournament? Which lightweight division would be a better fit for me, better matchups that I could win and get that $1 million at the end. So he kind of has some, analysis of the rosters to do there. But I do think it's one of those two that's likely. The Nate Diaz option is intriguing. They wouldn't even have to sign with the promotion to do that. They could, do it under Nate Diaz's new promotion. Eddie Alvarez could co-promote with his own thing. So there's some stuff going on there. The boxing thing that was mentioned is intriguing as well. He was the rumored opponent for Oscar De La Hoya's comeback for a brief moment there before that all fell apart. So he seems like he has a lot of possibilities there. If I had to guess, I mean, the Bellator story that, as Danny mentioned, is kind of cool there. This is the guy who was the co-main event on Bellator 1. Like, for him to go back there and really do this again would be kind of a nice way to end his career. But ultimately, I think Eddie Alvarez, he's a businessman. That's why he went to one championship. They offered him a tremendous deal. I think him and Lloyd Pearson, his manager, are going to look at the offers and see what makes the most sense, and they'll probably follow where the money is.
All right. I think he's going to go to PFL. Those are my thoughts. Those are some big checks. Pet is cashed, and it's a third major title that he could possibly win. All right. Topic 5.
I have to apologize. Sorry to bring up Man U. I know, tough times.
It's all right. PFL announced their final show of the year. This is the conclusion of their 2022 season where they crowned 6 new champions, and they give them each a bag containing $1 million. It takes place on November 25th, the day after Thanksgiving. This card is a pay-per-view, fellas. It's the first time ever for PFL going down this road. Is this the right call? Put a price tag on it. What's the sweet spot for them? Danny, take it away.
Yeah, man, this is a tough one. And I've been covering the PFL closely. I've been to several of their finals when they were down here in Florida, as well as I was covering them. And I love the PFL product. It's awesome. And the championship, the nights are a lot of fun. The fighters, are fighting like they're fighting for $1 million. Like it's, you see it, you feel it. It's awesome. But I don't know if pay-per-view is the right avenue. Right now, if you look at the mixed martial arts world, you already have to pay Showtime to watch Bellator. The pay-per-views for the UFC are getting quite expensive. ESPN Plus, Fight Pass. If you watch BKFC, you pay monthly as well, although it's not a lot of money. But you just keep adding all these expenses, and now you're adding one more with the pay-per-view, when I think at this point, although the PFL has done a tremendous job at establishing themselves within the industry, they're still very much at a phase of, we're just trying to get as many eyeballs as possible. So I don't know if pay-per-view is the right move. But if that's the route that they decided to go, and historically, like outside of the UFC, pay-per-view hasn't really been too successful in MMA, then that's the route that they're going to go. I would say, and I don't want to sound disrespectful here, but under $20 is probably where you want to be. Like, I don't know, they can put it like $80 and compare it to like the UFC $50. I don't know if they can do that. When you start getting maybe into like $40, $39.99, I think maybe that's a little bit more doable. But if you're still trying to get in some eyes, I think probably the cheaper, the better.
Oof, 20. Wow. I mean, I'll pay. I gladly pay 20, but for some reason, I thought it'd be a little higher. Next up is Mike Bond. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, this feels like a miss in my opinion. It just doesn't feel like the right time. You're asking people to pay for a pay-per-view headlined by Kayla Harrison versus Larissa Pacheco 3, a fight that we've seen twice already before and, weren't all that competitive in my opinion. So yeah, it just doesn't feel like the right time for it, but they're doing it and they're going to make this jump. And I'm curious to see, the payoff. They obviously, give us the product for, free or on ESPN or whatever during the season. Now you're asking people to pay all the money for the conclusion. And yeah, it just doesn't feel right in this time. I know there's some interesting fights on there. I know they're trying to work on some things to maybe, beef up the card a little bit more and make it worth the money to, the buyer a little bit more. But I just don't know if they're going to be able to do something that makes you feel like no matter what, I have to see this card. It's worth my money. And from what I'm hearing, and aggregators don't report this as factual news or anything, but it is probably going to be in the $40 to $50 range, which to me feels like asking quite a bit out of the people out there for all the reasons Danny said when you're already shelling out the money. So I can't imagine, this breaks, 100,000 buys would be a tremendous success. 50,000 might even be a success for them. I don't even know if it gets there. So they're making a big risk there. I know they pay a ton of money to the athletes and they need to start recouping this to some degree, but it just doesn't feel like the right time for me.
All right. How about you, Ghost? 6 title fights. Bird Ghost, they signed him. He's on the card. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not so sure it's the right time, guys. They put out a great product. Every year it feels like it's getting better. Nice signings, great fights. But I feel like it's a little late in the game to kind of introduce this pay-per-view to us. I feel like maybe we could have stomached it a little easier if throughout the year we kept hearing it all culminates on pay-per-view. I don't know. It just feels like we were kind of tricked in a way at the end here. But as the guy said, we're already spending a lot of money on mixed martial arts. And it's the holiday season, guys. A lot of people are spending money on presents and trips and stuff like that. So I would say if you're going to do this, the beef, as Mike brought up, you got to make that undercard a little bit stronger because you're right. We're watching a rematch again in that title fight. 1999 was a great year for me. I just graduated high school. I've been doing a lot of cool things. But $25, I think that's where I could stomach it, guys. $25 seems like my sweet spot.
Man, with inflation. All right. I thought 40. I thought we all agree on 40. We chug 40s. My waist is 40. It just sounded like 40 was the number, but all right. Good stuff. You guys broke it down perfectly. I told you 3 of the best MMA minds in the biz, and that's why you should always tune in every week here on Spinning Back Clique. We'll see you next week, fellas.